The snow fell like ash from an unseen fire, heavy and endless, burying the path behind him. Each step sank deep into the white earth, the crunch of his boots muffled by the storm. His name was Harik, son of Torvald, a man born in the shadow of mountains that scraped the sky. Tonight, those same peaks loomed like silent gods, watching him test the thin line between life and death. Harik's fur cloak was stiff with frost. His beard was frozen to his chest, and his breath steamed from his mouth like smoke from a dying forge. He had been hunting all day, tracking the trail of a wounded elk that would feed his family through what was left of winter. But the elk was gone now. The tracks had vanished under new snow, and in their place, other prints appeared. They were smaller, closer together, following him. Wolves. He stopped, his heartbeat slow and heavy in his chest. The wind roared through the trees, bending their spines until they creaked like ships in a storm. Somewhere behind him, a low growl threaded through the night air, a sound so soft it might have been the wind, but deep enough to raise the hair on the back of his neck. Harik gripped his axe tighter. Its head was chipped from years of work, but the edge was still keen. He carried a small round shield on his back, and beneath his cloak, a sayax, a short sword, hung from his belt. He had fought men before, in raids and feuds. But this was different. Men could be reasoned with, frightened, bought. The wild answered to no law but hunger. He walked on, his eyes scanning the tree line. The forest seemed to breathe with him. Every gust of wind moved the shadows. Every snowflake caught the faint reflection of the moon, turning the night into a restless sea of white ghosts. Then, from the darkness, came the first shape, gray and low, gliding silently between the trees. A wolf, then another, and another. Their eyes glowed faintly, catching the pale moonlight. There were at least 4, maybe 5, forming a wide circle around him. Harik didn't run. He knew the rules of the wild. Turn your back, and you become prey. He raised his axe and took a step backward toward a fallen tree, where he could face only one side. The wolves fanned out, closing the circle. One crept closer, its breath visible in the freezing air. It lowered its head, ears pressed flat. Another moved to flank him, its paws silent over the snow. Harik's breath deepened. He could feel the gods watching, the old gods who loved courage and despised weakness. He spoke aloud, his voice a growl in the storm. Come then, let us see which of us is hungrier. The first wolf lunged. Harik swung his axe in a wide arc, the blade flashing silver in the dark. It struck bone with a wet crack, and the wolf fell, yelping and twisting. The others hesitated, just for a moment, but in the next heartbeat, they came as one, a blur of fur and fangs. He roared and struck again, the axe cleaving through the air, catching another across the snout. Pain and blood filled the snow. A third leapt at his arm. He slammed it with his shield, feeling the jolt in his bones. Teeth tore at his cloak. He twisted, kicking out, driving his boot into the ribs of the smallest. For every blow he gave, 2 came back. The wolves darted in and out, testing his strength, their growls rising into a single terrible chorus. His arm was bleeding, his lungs burned. Yet he did not fall. At last, a howl cut through the storm, the pack leader's call. The shapes drew back, fading into the swirling snow. Only the bodies of 2 remained near him, black stains spreading around them. Harik stood trembling, not from fear but exhaustion. He leaned against the fallen tree, his axe buried in the snow beside him. Around him, silence returned, broken only by the crackle of the wind and the faint drip of blood melting through ice. He looked to the sky. Through the swirling clouds, a sliver of moon appeared. He raised his head, breathing hard. Not tonight, he whispered. You will not have me tonight. And in that frozen forest, far from his village, Harik learned the truth every Viking knew in his bones. The North was not conquered. It was survived. The storm that had tested Harik was not just a single night's trial. It was a glimpse into the eternal struggle between man and the wilderness, a battle that shaped the soul of every Viking. The sagas rarely speak of peace, because in the North, peace was not a season. It was a breath between storms. Beyond the villages and fjords lay a world that moved with its own rhythm, The forests of birch and pine, the frozen marshes, the tundra stretching farther than the eye could see. It was a land alive with sound. The crack of ice beneath hooves, the howl of wolves echoing off stone cliffs, the deep bellow of bears waking from winter sleep. The Vikings were born into that world, raised on the edge of danger. To survive it, they had to understand it, not with words, but with instincts older than memory. Their ancestors had crossed the cold seas from the east, bringing iron, faith, and fire. But even the hardest steel bent before nature's will, so they learned to bend with it, to read tracks in the snow, to smell rain in the wind, to know when the silence of the woods meant something unseen was watching. Children grew up hearing not fairy tales, but warnings. The forest takes what it is owed. In Viking lands, wolves were both feared and respected. They were predators, yes, but also symbols of the gods. Odin himself was said to walk with two wolves, Geri and Freki, and to feed them from his own hand. To the Norse mind, that meant something profound. The gods did not destroy the wild, they commanded it. So men, too, sought to command their fear. When wolves attacked livestock or roamed too close to settlements, the people responded with organized hunts known as ulfadrap, the wolf killings. Men from neighboring farms gathered with spears and torches, their boots crunching through snow as they formed long lines across the woods. They drove the pack into open ground, shouting and striking shields to mimic thunder, until the wolves were trapped. Then came the spears, fast, brutal, and efficient. Yet even in victory, the Vikings spoke of wolves with a strange reverence. To wear a wolf pelt was to carry danger on your back, a warning and a boast. It meant you had faced the wild and lived. Bears, however, were another matter. A wolf might be an enemy, but a bear was a god's shadow. The bear could tear through shields, crush bones, and vanish into the trees as if swallowed by the earth itself. Every village had stories of hunters who met bears and did not return, their weapons found days later bent like twigs. The Vikings said such beasts were not mere animals, but berserkers, shapeshifters who took on fur and rage to test the courage of men. To kill a bear was not only dangerous, and it was sacred. The warrior who did so was marked by it. He would skin the creature himself, careful not to spill unnecessary blood, and wear the pelt into battle. From this, the word berserker, bear shirt, was born. Those warriors believed they absorbed the animal's strength, that its spirit entered them through the act of combat. They became wild-eyed, fearless, and unstoppable, their names whispered in both awe and terror. When we imagine Vikings, we often think of raids and sea voyages, but in truth, most of their battles were fought on land, not against men, but against nature itself. They fought hunger in winter, disease in the thaw, and predators year-round. Farmers guarded sheep and goats from prowling packs. Hunters ventured far into the forests, sometimes days away from the nearest fire, guided only by instinct and the flicker of northern lights overhead. In these forests, silence was the enemy. The Vikings believed that when the woods grew too quiet, something ancient was near. Sometimes it was a bear, sometimes worse, one of the Vetir, the spirits of the wild. Offerings were left at stones or streams, a few drops of ale, a piece of bread, a whisper to the old gods. It was not fear, but respect. They knew the forest remembered every trespass. Fire was their truest companion. A Viking camp at night was a fortress of flame and shadow. Men kept torches burning around the perimeter, for beasts hesitated before fire. They sang softly to keep courage in their hearts, telling tales of heroes who had faced worse, men who fought wolves barehanded, or who returned from the woods draped in fur and scars. Even in the darkest months, when the sun did not rise for weeks, they ventured out to check traps and hunt. Those who stayed indoors grew weak. Those who went out and came back alive earned not only food but pride. The Norse did not measure bravery by the sword alone. They measured it by survival. And so, through long winters and countless dangers, the people of the North carved their lives into the land like runes on stone. Every scar, every howl in the night, every story told by the fire was a reminder of one truth. The wild could not be conquered, but it could be respected, endured, and sometimes beaten. The morning after a hunt in the Viking Age began with silence, the kind that follows both triumph and loss. The snow carried the story of what had happened during the night. Prints of men, wolves or bears mingled and vanished beneath the drifting frost. Smoke curled from the remains of the fire, carrying the smell of pine, blood, and iron. For the Vikings, this was not the aftermath of chaos. It was the daily rhythm of survival. Weapons were never far from hand. Every man, even the poorest farmer, owned at least an axe. Not just the long-handled weapon of war used on raids, but a smaller one, practical, sharp, and perfectly balanced. It split firewood, built homes, and in desperate moments, protected life. A Viking axe was the tool that stood between man and the wild. When wolves circled too close or a bear wandered into the fields, there was no time to fetch a sword. The axe was already there, hanging by the door, within reach of instinct. The Vikings swung it not with panic but precision born of generations. They had learned that beasts moved with patterns, that a bear always led with its left paw, that a wolf lunged low before aiming for the throat. Children learned these lessons early. Boys followed their fathers into the woods, carrying small spears or knives. They were taught to listen before they moved, to feel the wind's direction, to know when the forest's silence meant danger. Even girls, often left to tend sheep or fetch water, carried sayexes, short, broad knives that could slice cleanly through hide and rope alike. They were not helpless. The wild did not allow helplessness to survive. The Vikings also built with defense in mind. Villages were never placed deep in the forest. They were set near water or on open slopes where danger could be seen coming. Livestock pens were fenced with sharpened stakes, and barns had heavy wooden doors barred at night. Fires burned low but steady, casting circles of light that kept predators hesitant. Still, the wild was never far. Sometimes wolves came anyway, drawn by hunger during long winters. When that happened, the men gathered quickly. There was no time for shouting or ceremony, only the sound of spears being lifted, of shields pulled from the wall. They fanned out, forming a half circle, cutting off escape. Wolves were fast, but humans had strategy. The Norse fought as a pack themselves. They used torches not only for light but for fear. Fire was a weapon that no beast could fully face. Flames hissed and spat against the snow as men shouted to keep courage high. The crackle of burning pine mingled with growls and howls until one drowned the other. When a wolf fell, it was burned, not out of hatred, but to return its spirit to the gods. Against bears, things were different. Bears did not flee from noise. They met it with fury. The Vikings respected that. They knew better than to chase a bear into its den or fight one in the open. Instead, they used traps. Clever, brutal contraptions made from logs and ropes. A baited carcass was tied near a shallow pit or a heavy branch rigged with tension. When the bear lunged, the weight of its own strength became its downfall. It was a war between patience and power. When the trap worked, the bear was killed quickly, almost ritually. The man who delivered the final blow was believed to inherit its might. If it failed, and sometimes it did, the cost was high. Those who returned from failed hunts carried scars that glowed white against sunburned skin, marks that spoke of both danger and survival. But the Vikings were not only hunters or fighters, they were thinkers. They studied the ways of the wild, adapting their habits to those of the beasts they lived among. Hunters wore cloaks lined with fur that carried the scent of the forest. Some rubbed pine resin or animal fat on their arms to mask human odor. They watched how wolves stalked deer and copied their patience, how owls hunted in silence, how foxes vanished into snow. The line between man and nature was thin, and the Vikings walked it with both caution and pride. In the long nights of winter, they told stories of these hunts around the fire. Not of glory, but of wisdom. The old men spoke of times when bears walked openly among farms, when wolves followed travelers for miles through the woods, their eyes like twin coals in the dark. The lesson was always the same. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to stand firm in its presence. The women too played their part in this unending battle. They prepared salves for bites and wounds using herbs like yarrow and juniper. They smoked meat high in the rafters to keep the scent from drifting out and attracting scavengers. They tended the fire through the night, a small, glowing barrier against the darkness. Some whispered charms to keep the spirits of the wild at bay, while others, quietly practical, simply sharpened the knives. Every detail of Viking life, the architecture of homes, the design of weapons, even the way they stored food, was shaped by the world beyond their doors. Theirs was not a civilization built in spite of nature, but within it. They did not seek to tame the wild, only to coexist with it, on the edge, where danger met discipline. For every saga that tells of kings and gods, there are 100 untold tales of shepherds facing wolves, of farmers defending their land, of travelers staring down the eyes of something hungry in the dark. It was in these silent moments, not in battlefields or halls, that true Viking strength was tested. The line between fear and reverence was thin in the Viking world. What they could not conquer, they learned to worship. And what they worshipped, they learned to understand. The wild was not just a danger, it was a teacher, an enemy, and a god all at once. Long before the sagas were written, the North was already filled with stories told by firelight. When storms howled and wolves cried beyond the longhouse walls, children listened to their elders whisper tales of beasts that carried the souls of warriors or punished those who disrespected nature. Every sound outside meant something. Every shadow had a name. The bear, for instance, was not merely an animal to the Vikings. It was a being of immense power, fierce, cunning, unstoppable. The Old Norse word björn meant both bear and man, a reflection of the creature's human-like might and will. Warriors who wished to channel that strength became berserkers, donning bearskins before battle and entering a trance of uncontrollable fury. It was said that in that state they could not feel pain, that their eyes turned as cold as the sea, and that Odin himself guided their rage. No ordinary man would dare mock a berserker, for they believed the bear's spirit lingered inside them. Some tribes held bear feasts after a great hunt, where the animal's skull was mounted on a pole, and its spirit thanked with song and ale. The bear was never just killed. It was confronted, honored, and sent back to the realm of gods. The wolf, too, held a strange place in their hearts. It was both sacred and cursed. The sagas spoke of Fenrir, the monstrous wolf destined to devour Odin during Ragnarok, the world's end. But they also spoke of wolves as companions of the gods. Odin himself was said to keep 2 wolves by his side. Geri and Freki, his constant companions, fed from his hand while he watched over the living and the dead. To see a wolf in the distance was to be reminded of both fate and freedom. The Vikings admired its cunning, its loyalty to the pack, and its silence. Yet they also feared it, for wolves could sense weakness, just as men could. It was said that if a wolf circled a campfire and howled 3 times before vanishing, someone in that household would die before the thaw. No one questioned such omens. They did not need proof. In a land ruled by the wild, superstition was a kind of armor. The sea, too, had its monsters, whales, serpents, and spirits said to drag ships beneath the waves. To face them was to face death itself. But unlike other men, the Vikings did not avoid danger. They turned it into destiny. When storms rose, they did not pray for calm. They prayed for courage. The idea of the hammer, the inner shape or spirit form of a person, was central to their belief. They thought that some people could change their hammer, becoming animals in dreams or fury. Warriors who fought like beasts were said to shift their shape, not physically, but spiritually. They could channel the strength of bears, the agility of wolves, or even the patience of a stalking lynx. Such transformation was not magic in their eyes. It was mastery of one's deepest instincts. Women had their own bond with the wild. In Norse lore, certain women were vulvas, seeresses who could communicate with spirits of nature and fate. They carried staffs made from animal bones, wore cloaks of fur, and called upon powers older than the gods themselves. When danger came, a famine, a sickness, or a predator, the people turned to them for guidance. They were not hunters, yet their power came from the same place, the dark, unknowable wild. In this world, survival was never separate from belief. When a bear was slain, Its skull might be buried under the threshold of a longhouse to protect it from evil. When wolves howled near a village, people whispered charms into the fire, asking the spirits to turn their hunger elsewhere. The Vikings did not separate life and faith, nature and gods. It was all one vast pattern, a weave of fear, respect, and courage. Over time, these encounters shaped their culture's deepest symbols. The wolf's head became a mark of ferocity, the bear's paw a symbol of endurance. Warriors carried such emblems carved into their shields or burned into their flesh. They believed these marks gave them protection, not from the animals themselves, but from the weakness that made men hesitate before danger. In the winter gatherings, skalds, the poets and storytellers, retold great hunts as if they were epics. A man who had once faced a bear was remembered like a hero of battle. His scars were proof not only of survival, but of a kind of communion. He met the wild and did not turn away, they would say, and everyone in the hall would raise a cup. To the Vikings, there was no divide between the world of men and the world of beasts. Each reflected the other. The wolf hunted with its pack, just as raiders sailed in theirs. The bear stood alone, as did kings and chieftains who ruled through might. Even the ravens circling above the battlefield were not just scavengers. They were messengers of Odin, feasting on the fallen as a sacred ritual. When a warrior died in the forest, they said his spirit joined the wild. His voice became the wind, his strength the mountain, his courage the growl that echoed in distant valleys. And perhaps that is why, centuries later, even when Christianity began to wash over the north, the people still whispered old names for the animals that ruled their land. The faiths might change, but the wild never did. The Viking Age was an age of men who walked with beasts and in many ways became them. Not out of savagery, but out of understanding. They knew that to live in the north was to live at the mercy of nature, and that mercy was earned, never given. When the snows melted and spring light touched the fjords once again, the north changed its face. But the memory of the winter beasts never left. Those who had survived bore marks that would never fade, scars etched not only into their skin, but into their hearts. For every Viking, survival against the wild was not simply a matter of skill or strength. It was a quiet, enduring battle between man and nature, and the outcome defined who they were. In the sagas, you can still hear echoes of those nights when the world was nothing but darkness, and somewhere beyond the longhouse walls, the wild waited. Wolves prowled at the edges of farms, bears awoke from their dens hungry for flesh, and eagles circled over frozen lakes. These stories were more than warnings. They were lessons. They taught that courage meant standing firm not only against enemies with swords, but against the silent and patient power of the land itself. Generations of Norse people grew up with that truth. Even when they sailed away from Scandinavia, their relationship with the wild came with them. In Iceland, settlers learned to read the moods of volcanoes and storms. In Greenland, they built their homes near cliffs where seals basked and polar bears hunted. In Vinland, what we now call North America, they met forests thicker than anything they had seen before and animals unlike any they had known. But wherever they went, the instinct remained. Listen to the land, watch the beasts, and never mistake calm for safety. To the Vikings, every landscape had a will. The mountains were alive, the rivers spoke, and even the sea, their greatest path and greatest threat, was considered a living, conscious force. They believed that the gods themselves had built the world from the body of a slain giant. His bones became the mountains, his blood the oceans, and his hair the trees. In that myth lay a truth they lived by. Nature was not separate from them. It was part of their own story. That belief shaped everything they did. When a warrior carved a beast onto his shield, he wasn't decorating, he was invoking. The wolf represented ferocity, the bear endurance, the serpent cunning. These creatures weren't distant symbols, they were companions in spirit. To die with a wolf on your banner was to die with pride. To wear a bear tooth around your neck was to carry courage. To face a storm without fear was to be worthy of the gods. Even in their laws, the wild left its mark. A man who killed a bear without reason might be shunned or forced to offer atonement. A hunter who wasted meat was seen as disrespecting the spirits of the forest. When wolves threatened livestock, they were hunted with reverence, never mocked, never left to suffer. To destroy without purpose was dishonor. To face danger and respect it, that was nobility. Their songs reflected this balance between violence and respect. Skalds sang of warriors who hunted bears with spears and axes, yes, but they also sang of those who spared them. A warrior who could restrain his hand was as honored as one who struck, because to understand the wild was to understand oneself, and that, more than any raid or conquest, was what made a true Viking. And yet, as the centuries passed and Christianity spread across the north, the old beliefs began to fade. Churches rose where sacred groves once stood. Priests replaced the vulvas and psalms replaced the old chants. But even then, the wild could not be silenced. It lingered in the edges of their faith, in the carvings of beasts on church doors, in the runic patterns hidden beneath Christian crosses, in the tales whispered by fishermen on stormy nights. The wolf became a devil in sermons, but in the hearts of the people it remained a reminder of freedom, of danger, of the unbroken bond between man and the earth. The bear was cast as a symbol of pride, yet still respected for its strength. And the raven, once Odin's messenger, continued to follow ships across gray waters, its cry echoing like the voice of memory itself. Centuries later, when archaeologists uncovered the burial mounds of great warriors, they found tokens of the wild buried with them. Bear claws, wolf fangs, carved wooden stags, and feathers of ravens. Even in death, the Vikings had not left the wild behind. They took it with them, into the afterlife, into legend. Because in the end, to be a Viking was not just to fight battles or sail seas. It was to live in constant conversation with a world that could kill you at any moment, and still face it with open eyes. The wind, the snow, the beasts. They were not enemies, but mirrors. The wild tested their limits and, in doing so, revealed who they truly were. The sagas tell us that courage is not found in the absence of fear, but in walking forward despite it. That lesson came not from kings or gods, but from the wilderness itself. Every time a Viking stepped into the forest or sailed into a storm, they carried that truth with them. They knew that one day they might fall, to a beast, to the cold, to fate. But they also knew that every step into the unknown was an act of defiance, an oath to live with honor. And that is why their story endures. Because even now, 1,000 years later, we still recognize the struggle. The wild still waits beyond our walls, unseen but eternal. We still feel that ancient pull, to face what frightens us, to find meaning in danger, and to respect what cannot be tamed. So when you hear the howl of a wolf, or see the black wings of a raven cutting across a northern sky, remember them. The people who looked into the eyes of nature and saw themselves. Remember the men and women who walked with the beasts, not as conquerors, but as equals. Because to the Vikings, survival was never about escaping the wild. It was about becoming part of it.